And when you look at Saturn in astrology, in alchemy, in all these different parables and stories, and what this planet represents, Saturn is considered to be the great teacher. Because when you're talking about Saturn, you're talking about being pushed to your limit to build up things within you, like your self-control, self-discipline, creating obstacles and adversity to test you and to challenge you. And remember, this is what we get with the god Shani, placing challenges and obstacles in your path for you to overcome. And it's the same thing with alchemy and Saturn being represented as the black sun, taking you through that process of shedding away all those impurities within yourself. And the only way you can get beyond these things and separate them from you is to face them head on. And this is what Saturn is all about, making you face the lowest aspects of yourself, that root chakra. And remember, the root chakra is represented by the devil, Satan. And this is why Satan and Saturn go hand in hand. Think about it. What does that word Satan mean? Adversary, someone or something deliberately placed in your path to oppose you, to be a conflicting force. Why did God create Satan in the Bible stories, in the Quran? Satan is communicating with God just like any other servant of God. And he only does things when God asks him to do it. And God basically uses him to test and tempt the children of God. It's because Satan is nothing more than a tool of God, a tool used to teach us lessons and to push us to grow by working our way through that adversity, that adversary, because it's just a fact. Adversity makes you grow. Remember, we're all carbon based. And what happens when you put carbon under heavy pressure? It becomes a diamond. Diamonds don't form in picture perfect settings. They form in the most harsh of conditions. And out of all of that heavy weight and constraint in that rough environment, you get this beautiful, pristine, yet hard to bend, hard to break element. And we're all here living in Satan's system, where everything is pointing you away from God, your higher self. And if you live within this system while making an active effort to not be a part of it, it can literally be like stepping into that fire that they talk about in alchemy, that calcination process, making that process of growth very painful. Now, we don't know how long this system has been in place, but we know that nobody has been targeted harder within Satan's system than dark-skinned people. No one has faced more adversity, more tests, more challenges than human beings with dark skin. And if you link that up with everything else, it's almost as if out of everybody else here on this planet, we have the greatest lesson to learn and the highest form of evolution to achieve. Because again, we've been getting that pressure put on us harder than anyone else on planet Earth. And the tests and temptations for us are on another level. Now, remember, with the Yakub theory, you have that idea that these mutations within the human DNA were not just a spontaneous event, but that it was something that was purposely done, and that the human race was purposely divided. And when you really get into the theory, it's explained that this was done in order for the original people on the planet to face something within themselves, that when they were grafted down to that last form, it brought a part of them out to the surface that they were meant to face, to master, and ultimately to evolve from that experience and become greater, that they would basically be ruled over by their lower selves until they could master their lower selves. And here's the thing. We know, again, that we have these two forms of melanin that separate us as human beings. And we know, for the most part, there is no real difference between these two forms of melanin. With both of these melanins, you have carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, and oxygen. But the one thing that makes pheomelanin different is that extra added element of sulfur. And of course, that sulfur combines with carbon to create carbon disulfide, which dilutes that carbon, making it lighter. And what's interesting is that when you look at the word sulfur and look into the origins of it and the meaning behind it, you're going to see that that word sulfur is another way of saying hellfire and brimstone, or literally to burn. And we know what hellfire and brimstone is and what it's going to lead us to. It's going to lead us to Satan. And when you get into the occult and the symbolism surrounding it, you're going to come across something called the Leviathan cross, which is also referred to as Satan's cross. Now, in alchemy, this symbol for Leviathan's cross is used to represent the alchemical element sulfur. So the symbol of Satan is being used to represent the element sulfur. And again, this is the one and only element in melanin that separates us as human beings. And I think we can all see who is running this planet, who has the most control and power within Satan's system. Of course, if you're not at the top of that pyramid, we're all in this together. But you cannot dismiss something this cut and dry. I mean, it's like they're just outright telling you these people in power are literally playing the role of Satan. Just like it says, they are the synagogue of Satan. And if you base this off the idea that this planet is being ruled by Saturn, then you can see it as they are being used to test us, to tempt us, and to be the ultimate adversary that forces us to see the worst aspects of ourselves and to grow and evolve. And maybe until we figure out whatever it is that we need to figure out, master whatever it is we need to master, we are going to continue to be sent here to learn these lessons. And based off of everything, if there's any chance that we are being sent back here, it would seem like that thing that would be keeping us coming back would be carbon 12, that beast within us riding that never ending loop of sin. And again, it would seem to be in our best interest to strive for that carbon 13, that stronger balance within ourselves. But these actually aren't the only two forms of carbon. There's actually a third form of carbon called carbon 14. And carbon 14 is composed of 6 protons, 6 electrons, and 8 neutrons. So we're talking about the most stable form of carbon in existence, with 8 neutrons making up the nucleus, giving it the strongest foundation out of these 3 variations of carbon. But as stable as carbon 14 is as an element on its own, when it comes to the physical world, once that carbon isotope reaches carbon 14, it becomes physically unstable. And it actually becomes radioactive to the point that it can no longer be expressed physically. And the only way that it can exist in a physical form is in these nearly untraceable amounts that are left behind. So think about it. You've got carbon 12 making up 98.9% of the physical world, heavily attaching itself to the physical world. Then you've got carbon 13 making up 1.1%. So still being connected to the physical world, but operating as a very rare minority within it. And then you have carbon 14, which has gotten to the point where its nucleus, its foundation, is so strong with those protons, that positive energy, aka the higher mind, reaching a level to where it can no longer exist within the physical world. It's evolved into something that is operating completely beyond the material, or in other words, something that is no longer chained to that black cube of the devil. And of course, Saturn is forming that cube shaped like a hexagon. And a cube, just by design, is all about containment, keeping things boxed in. And of course, that's where Saturn's hexagon seems to be leading us, boxing us in and keeping us contained with everything that hexagon seems to represent. All the things of the material world, the third dimensional world represented by that hexagon, which forms a cube in its third dimensional form. So we could see this as, if you break away from Saturn, you break out of the cube, or basically you break out of that containment on a third dimensional level. And you would just think that the next level beyond this third dimensional existence would be the fourth. Well, in geometry, there's something called a tesseract, a cube expanding out from within another cube. And it's basically a geometrical shape that's used to help visually illustrate the concept of a fourth dimension. And you can think of it like this. You start out with a square, which is a 2D shape representing two-dimensional reality. Then you move up to a cube, which is a 3D version of that square, giving you a representation of third dimensional reality. And so the next step up from that cube would be a tesseract, another cube expanding out from that 3D cube, representing a possible fourth dimensional reality. And even though that object surrounding that cube in the tesseract looks just like an ordinary cube, it's actually something much more complex. It's a visualization of something that we can't truly understand or express in a third dimensional form, because it's something beyond this third dimensional reality, which, being third dimensional beings, we're kind of limited to perceiving things from a third dimensional point of view. So that outer cube is just a way of giving us a third dimensional visualization of a possible fourth dimensional reality. Now, obviously, being third dimensional beings, we look at 2D objects from a higher perspective. We can't get down to a 2D level. So we can only observe the two-dimensional world from a distance, looking over it. And with the tesseract, you have the same idea, with that cube inside representing third dimensional reality, and the cube outside surrounding it at a higher level where it can observe the cube or observe the third dimension. And this is why you see the cube and being in possession of the cube being pushed as being such a powerful thing in the storylines of different shows, movies, comics, because symbolically, possessing that cube would mean that person would be in possession of third dimensional reality, thus placing themselves above it, or at least giving them some level of control over it. And again, here on this third dimensional plane, we can see that the cube is going to point us back to Saturn, seemingly having control over this third dimensional reality. And this is where we kind of got to start thinking outside the box and questioning what they tell us about this reality, because they tell us that the Earth is the center of the universe and the center of the solar system, and that everything pretty much revolves around the Earth. But this is something that we really got to question, because everything we can see seems to be pointing at Saturn being the literal center of everything. And think about this. They say that Saturn has the most moons out of any planet in the solar system, 82 moons in total. So with all of this other stuff that we can see, it would make you think, is Earth just another moon of Saturn? I mean, think about it. You have the moon Titan, one of Saturn's moons that looks extremely similar to the Earth, and it's supposed to have a similar atmosphere. They say outside of Earth, it is the most hospitable world in our solar system to support human life. It's got lakes, oceans, land masses, just like Earth. And this is a moon of Saturn. And if you really look at it, it looks like the Earth with some sort of distortion over it, like it's almost digitized. And it makes you wonder, could this be what the Earth really looks like with all these radio waves, electromagnetic energy, and whatever else is going on up there? We know we've got a lot of conflict about the images of Earth that they give us. We only have a few supposedly real images of Earth. And it seems like they're trying to avoid showing us what the Earth really is. So one of the things we got to consider is that the Earth might actually be a moon and not a planet, like they're telling us. And again, it's like they give us little hints through entertainment. Remember, the Lord of the Rings, the story of the one ring to rule them all. Sauron forges the 9 rings and gives them to the 9 kings of the race of men, human beings. And remember, he has that power to control minds. And after forging that ring for himself, the one ring to rule them all, he places that power to control minds within that ring, which gives him control over the 9 kings. And remember, around the time of this story, the solar system was still said to be composed of 9 planets. And remember, Sauron also has the 7 rings of power forged. And when those 7 rings are given to the dwarves, they increase their greed and their anger. So their desire for material possessions and that negative energy within them is increased by the 7 rings. And how many rings does Saturn have? 7 rings. Then when Sauron has to abandon his physical form, remember what form he takes on? An eye. The eye of Sauron. That all-seeing eye that can enter the minds of anyone connected to the one ring. And he places that eye on a tower. And remember what they say, that Saturn's hexagon is towering through the clouds of Saturn. And we know that hexagon is located on the north and south poles in the perfect spot that when you look at Saturn from a distance, it forms what looks like the pupil of an eye. It's like they're just giving it to you. Sauron is ruling the minds of those connected to the rings, aka Saturn is ruling the minds of those connected to its rings. And of course, Saturn's rings are emitting that frequency of sin that if you co-sign to it can keep you in that cycle indefinitely. And remember, when you look at the traditional symbol for a radio signal, those rings of Saturn would be the radio waves being broadcast out. And if you've ever seen the movie They Live, you'll remember that after the guy gets the glasses that help him to see the world around him for what it really is, see all the propaganda and mind control being used on the masses, see all the brainwashing being subliminally embedded into everything on a physical level, see certain people for who they really are. And then he learns where the source of all of this is. And he figures out that this false reality around him is being projected from a satellite. And if you remember, they gave you that close-up shot of the circuits running within that satellite. And those circuits were actually forming a sine wave. So he figures out where the satellite is, destroys the satellite. And after he destroys the satellite, everybody's connection to the false reality is broken. And they're all able to see things for what they really are, people for who they really are. So in the same right, if you break that connection to Saturn, you will find yourself on the outside looking in, seeing things for what they really are.